How's it going, everybody? Are you guys at all familiar with like random LCD games or plug and play games or Tamagotchis or anything like that? Cool, okay. Well, I'm Faran Thomason. I worked at MGA making some of these awesome 9.99 games using wonderful segmented LCD technology. We also did a few plug and play games that were in the vein of Guitar Hero or Dance Dance Revolution. I'll hand it over to Ted to introduce himself.
And I'm Ted Tahquechi. I worked at Atari at Accolade, and then I ended up at Mattel Toys, where I was the product manager for all of the Hot Wheels titles.
And I'm James Purple Hampton, as my friends call me. I started out as a game tester at Lucasfilm Games. I graduated to becoming a game producer at Atari, where I was a producer on Alien vs. Predator, the alien shirt. And afterwards I worked for 3DO and then on to Macromedia and landing at LeapFrog, which was to make educational arcade games for the Leapster line, handheld game system.
Cool.
Back to you, Faran.
Okay, so yes, the toy industry and the video game industry do have some kind of overlap. Mainly the toy industry will take a popular trend or fad, such as like arcade games, and then try to like cost reduce it down. Next slide. And will then try to cost reduce it down into something that can be bought for like $9.99. We popularized them as shut-up toys. So when like the little kid is walking through the aisle of like Target or Kmart, and they're going, I want this, and the parent looks at it, oh, it's only 10 bucks. Here, kid, shut the H up, and I can get on with my shopping. So I can't say the fidelity was the best for these games, but we did ship them for maybe 10 plus years. MGA, the company, got started from Micro Games of America, and their first breakout product was importing some of the Game & Watch items, and then the president of the company was like, hey, I can do that as well. So then he would go and get popular licenses from arcade games, such as Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Galaxian, or maybe a popular movie like Star Wars, and then in those days, you'd go to the factory in China, they would actually have a catalog of like play patterns, like the Space Invaders play pattern. So you could take a Space Invaders game and then change the graphics to, say, King Kong, and then label slap King Kong on it, boom, you got a King Kong game. Wash, rinse, repeat. And that is actually how MGA built their success into releasing the Bratz dolls. Let's see what the next slide is. So the Bratz dolls were such a phenomenon that we actually made our own homegrown video games based on the Bratz dolls. This one is a commercial for our Bratz dance mat. Fun fact, I don't know if anybody's a Lucy Hale fan, but she made her debut in our Bratz TV game ads. So not only did we have dance mats, we also had a guitar game, which was kind of a riff on Guitar Hero as well. Both of these games, when themed on popular artists and our popular doll line, Rock Angels, were pretty big successes. So we were able to reskin these games and release them a couple times throughout my time at MGA. Let me get the next slide. And building on that success, we actually tried to kind of like swing for the fences with this next product called Mewcheese. So Mewcheese was kind of the first toys to life game. So Webkins, I don't know if you're familiar with Webkins. Webkins provided you with like a plush and a code. So we wanted to combine that online multiplayer play of Webkins, but with the put it in your pocket gameplay of a Tamagotchi, and we came up with this product called Mewcheese. So basically, Mewcheese is this little handheld. It's kind of like a Tamagotchi. We probably crammed way too many features for 6-year-olds. It has like a touch screen, a color screen, and then you could play it as a handheld using Tamagotchi gameplay. You could feed your pet and then raise your pet up to a certain level. And then we included the USB cable, which you could then plug into your TV. It takes the character that's on the little handheld device and transports them to an online world. And I'm not saying that was a lot, but it was definitely very forward-thinking, but probably a little complicated for our target market. But one of the unique things is, A, we got retail to buy in, so we probably did ship maybe upwards of 1 million units. And after it was kind of sunsetted on our end, a lot of the Mucci's fans actually programmed their own version of Mucci's. They emulated the hardware, and they have their own online world that still runs today. More power to them. Next slide. So going back to kind of the roots of MGA as a company, we did get the license for, I believe it was Shrek 3, and we had a whole variety of products based on that. So the one on the right was kind of our version of Operation, but it was done in 3D. So you would try to take like these little puns out of Shrek's face, like there would be a little frog in his throat. You try to gingerly remove the frog from the throat, and if you did it wrong, he would say kind of a witty catchphrase. However, we did not necessarily have the rights to Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy. We had to get like Eddie Murphy's cousin and Mike Myers' sanctioned voiceover actor. They weren't free, but I think it was just a way of Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy giving their friends a little bit of a kickback. So they did all of the voices for the game. We also did kind of figural LCD games. And these were probably some of the better LCD games that we made. These games like this used segmented displays. We were actually able to use dot matrix displays, which kind of gave it more of a Game Boy feel. And then we had an unreleased TV game, which was kind of like a Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but you could actually interact with the characters on the screen, kind of like you were playing it on the Nintendo Wii. Next slide. Following back up with the guitar game, the guitars were also a huge hit. Like I said, we were drafting off of Guitar Hero, although I might add, we actually did beat Guitar Hero to market. Another fun fact is that we actually had Taylor Swift, before she was famous, come in and kind of pitch herself to be involved in some of our music and rhythm games. Unfortunately, it was before she was popular, and we're like, oh, that's nice, but like, we probably didn't really see the potential that she had at the time, unfortunately.
Would you change that in hindsight?
No. Part of the reason was not as a result of her talent. The Bratz dolls generally were a little bit more edgier and a little bit more rock or hip hop in terms of the styling of the dolls, and our products tended to follow that, and she was a little bit more country at that particular time and wasn't as, like, for lack of a better term, sassy as the Bratz dolls. So there probably really wasn't a great matchup, but you know, it's a cool story. Next slide. And another thing similar to Mucci's that we did was we did crank out a lot of virtual pets. Tamagotchi is kind of this perennial favorite, and we were always trying to chase that business. So we did release a myriad of virtual pets. Those were for our Tokyo Go-Go theme, like the larger ones you see there. So they were meant to be high-tech pets of the Bratz girls. And then again, we had another stab at kind of a Webkinz kind of game, where you had the plush, you had a little Tamagotchi, and you had little codes that you could enter in online and take your character online. And then I think one of the funnest ones we made was actually a snow globe Tamagotchi. So we had a little penguin in his own little virtual world, and you could shake it up and see the little snow fall on his head. So we also did games that did not have screens. So when I first got to MGA, and we were just first starting out the MGA games line, we tried to do games that were like meant to facilitate friendships and relationships. So one of the ones we started out with was called Bratz Chat. You press a button and it would say, what's your friend's favorite color? And you'd have to guess to see how close you were as friends. And then we had another one called Secret Date, where you could pair up one of the Bratz girls and go out on a date with one of the Bratz boys. However, can't say that Walmart was pleased with either iteration of these two concepts. They thought dating was a little too spicy for young girls, and then they thought some of the questions in the Bratz Chat were maybe a little bit too controversial. So that was a case where we actually had to go back to the factory, go back to the copywriters, rewrite some of the questions so that they're all G-rated, and then kind of tone down the dating aspect of the Secret Date game. So one of the unfortunate things of making things like this is all the game code is burned onto the actual product. So if there's a recall, they send it back. You got to go back to the factory and start all over again, which can be kind of an expensive process. Next slide. And rounding it out, another fun potential lawsuit. We created a game called Fit It, and the factory gave us kind of the block diagrams for Tetris, but we changed the graphics. We were like, we're changing the graphics. We should be good to go. Unfortunately, we got a cease and desist letter from Radica or the Tetris company forcing us to either pull it or get sued. So then we just ripped off Sega columns and Sega didn't give a rip. We just went on with our life. And rounding it out, we tried to jump on the brain training fad. So as you can see, a lot of the products were fast follows of other popular fads and trends. And this was similar to Brain Age on Nintendo, where you'd have a bunch of different mental challenges, and we just put them on a little bit of an LCD screen. I think the execution of the casings was maybe a little marginal. The gameplay was good, but I think we're just a little too late to market for that particular trend. And rounding things out is probably one of the better games that we actually made, called Bratz Life. This game was actually done by, quote, real video game developers. I think the developers made ports of, I think, like Tony Hawk. So this was a cross between, this was like the Bratz meet Sims. Like, you were a Bratz girl, you'd go shopping, you'd interact with your friends, you could buy stuff. So it had all of the conspicuous consumption of being a Bratz girl kind of in its own virtual world. And that was pretty well received, won a few awards, and it was one of the few times that we invested the money and made a product that could probably stand head to head with a PlayStation or Nintendo game. And rounding it out, we had an unfortunately unreleased game that was kind of a knockoff of Roller Coaster Tycoon, and then we had our version of Wii Tennis. The Wii Tennis one did pretty good. And I'll hand it off to Ted.
That's me. So again, I'm Ted Tahquechi, and I started working at Mattel after I worked at Accolade, where I created the Test Drive Off-Road franchise. So it was kind of an easy transition for me to move from that racing game into doing Hot Wheels, which Hot Wheels, just like Barbie, are the two pillars for Mattel, and their big product lines, of course. I grew up with Hot Wheels. It's been around since May of 1968. So my entire life I was always a big Hot Wheels fan. So I was really excited to be able to have the opportunity to transition into doing something for children, because I had recently had my wife and I had recently had our twin boys. So we were really excited about that, to bring them into the toy world and have them as beta testers at home, which was really cool. If you want to move to the next slide. Okay, cool. PlayStation. Yep. So the first game that we're going to talk about is, if you want to start it, cool, is Hot Wheels Extreme Racing. The concept behind this was you would move yourself into all of the cool areas, all of the cool games that you did when in your backyard, like in your toy box or in your sandbox, or in just kind of cruising around the backyard, and you would be driving the vehicles through that environment. So just kind of bringing yourself into that environment. And it was really awesome to work with the Hot Wheels brand, but it was also somewhat limiting. So obviously, because I was working for a larger company, and it was during the time that Mattel Interactive was, kind of a short-lived iteration of the Mattel Corporation. We had a really cool collection of collection of vehicles to choose from. Unlike, we didn't have to chase for Hummers or Jeeps or anything like that, because the deep catalog offerings for Hot Wheels itself. And I'll just give you 1 second to take a look at how cool this guy looked. It was on PlayStation, and while I was there, I worked on games for PlayStation and for PC. And if we want to go to the next slide, and I think I'm good. If you want to go ahead one more time. And the next one I worked on was Hot Wheels Jets, around the time that I was just starting at Mattel. The Jets sub-license or sub-brand of the Hot Wheels brand was really starting to become cool, and we tapped Eagle Interactive, and they were the guys, if you're familiar with flight simulators or anything like that of the day. They made Luftwaffe Commander. And so they were, like a really hardcore flight sim company. And obviously the concept behind this was to be able to let kids fly around their house and, fly through the living room and your bedroom and garage and defend your house from invaders. So it was one thing. If you want to click forward. It had all kinds of different environments. It actually shipped with one of the Jets toys. For me, Hot Wheels, and I loved airplanes too. So I mean, it was a huge thing for me. The actual design of the game itself was done fairly early, and we spent the rest of the time in development actually kind of reining the developer in, because they were more worried about like aileron levels and thrust vectors and all that sort of stuff, and we were like, no, we just want to make it fun. So we kind of aimed towards like a pilot wings, for the N64, and just try to make it a real super accessible and super fun game, and the kids really liked it. And if you want to move forward. This is slot car racing, and I, again, as a very big Hot Wheels fan, I had in the 70s when I was young, the slot car tracks and had it in my house. And so when I started at Mattel and I was offered to do the slot car franchise, the first thing I wanted to do was actually get the controllers, the original slot car controllers, and make them so that they would hook up to a PC and work with it. And I was told that they were super expensive to make, and that they would never be able to find the tools and the molds and everything to go along with it. So every day during lunch, I would go into the archives in the Hot Wheels, and just dig through all the boxes and all the toys and everything like that. And I came across the original 1970s controllers, and we found 2 sets of them, and all of the molds were also there as well. So I worked with the fantastic genius engineers at Mattel, and we were able to Frankenstein 2 sets, two-player sets for the PC. Kept one in my drawer and sent the other one off to the developer. A week later, it came back. We plugged it in. Everything worked perfectly. I dragged my poor manager in and just sat her down in front of the game and said, start playing. A couple of minutes later, I had her manager in there, and everybody was laughing, having a good time, and one of them said, we should be selling this. And there you go. It suddenly wasn't too expensive anymore, and since we had the molds, we were ready to roll. So next is, this is Stunt Track Driver 2. So Stunt Track Driver 2, the concept behind that was to make a high fidelity game where you could actually run it on like a hand-me-down PC. So we were kind of aiming towards the PC that you would check your email on in 1999. And we did full motion pre-rendered video off of the CD, and it spooled off, and then we just made the tracks and the cars themselves that you would control kind of overlaid over it. So it allowed us to have a really cool, interesting look for the game. And again, kids really liked it. It was the second iteration of a building franchise, and I think that one was actually released by THQ after I departed Mattel. But working in the Hot Wheels division and working with a whole bunch of different properties before, like when I worked at Accolade making Test Drive Off-Road, really taught me that when you have a license that you're working with for, it doesn't matter if it's for a vehicle or for a toy, that you need to build in a ton more time into your development schedule than you think, because there's always going to be times when you're going to have to send it 2 or 3 times and get approvals from the licensor. And another thing that I learned is that a game that is made from a license, whether it's specifically a toy, is always better if the team that's involved really loves the game. And for me, as I said, I loved Hot Wheels, and I hope that the time and energy that I invested into the Hot Wheels franchise, netted some games that people really loved and enjoyed and felt that love for me. So, thank you. We'll move it forward.
And I'm James Hampton. Again, started as a tester at Lucasfilm Games, AVP at Atari. I actually was hired by a company called it was a studio called Cyclone Studios, and they, while I was there, got bought by 3DO and ended up working on Army Men Air Attack, which is like a helicopter version of the Army Men line. And like Ted, after he had his kids, my sister had my niece and nephew, and I decided that it would be fun to take games into a different direction. So I started at LeapFrog, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with LeapFrog, but I worked specifically on the Leapster line. Oh, right on. Yeah, and so it was a nice connection, and for parents who, didn't want necessarily their kids to be playing video games, but they still wanted to give them something fun to play. They felt that the Leapster line would, at least they knew that anything they'd be playing on it would be educational, and they were interested in having me work with them to sort of add the gameplay factor and bring up the games, because when I started, the Leapster games were interesting. They had a lot of compelling titles. However, they had this sort of, we would do something to solve the curriculum and then get something fun to play, and I wanted to kind of marry it closer together. So while you were playing the game, you were doing the curriculum, and that aligned up with they wanted to have a line of what we called the Leapster Arcade, which was meant to be like a lot of arcade games, single screen games, relatively pick up and play, easy to understand, yet with some curriculum goals in it instead of just getting the high score. But we did have high scores, so we worked with, I had folks I had worked with before on the Austin Powers game for austinpowers.com, the folks at WayForward who do the Shantae and a whole bunch of other things, way forward. But they were the people behind our Leapster Arcade line. And so the Leapster Arcade line were 4 games. First one was Word Chasers, which is very Pac-Man-esque, where you're, instead of looking for dots, you're trying to spell words which the letters are on the mice themselves that you're after. But from a game design point of view, we also wanted to have longer vision goals. So if you really got good and got a top score, you could unlock, I don't know if you can see it, but the lower screen has a pirate kitty, so he's wearing an eye patch, and that was something you had to unlock by getting a top score. So the next one was Cosmic Math, and this one we took what I call the Donkey Kong Country approach, which was we couldn't do 3D, fully 3D objects, but we could do pre-rendered sprites. So we had all these 3D asteroids and with cool looking ships. And in this case, it was a solving math problem. So it covered everything from addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. And to do the tuning, the difficulty tuning, we created flashcards with a stopwatch, and we went into a bunch of schools in the East Bay and just simply tested how fast kids could solve the problems in their, just looking at it without having paper in front of them. And based on their feedback or what we tracked, we put that as the difficulty challenge order, so it had this smooth curve to it. It was just a fascinating process, just because kids will tell you a lot if you choose to listen to them. So the last one of the other titles was Number Raiders, which might look familiar to Space Invaders. But again, we used that technique of, the Way Forward folks were really great with the artwork and the kind of reward system that comes with traditional arcade games. And one of the other titles was on the classic Snake game, but this case was called Letter Pillar, and your letter pillar got larger the more words you could spell, and again, you're tracking down which letters you're trying to go for the word that you're doing. And to again expand the reward system, we made it so that as you got deeper into the game or further levels, you would unlock different patterns that the body parts would become. So there's globes in there. We used basketballs, baseballs, and just anything we could think of. I think there's pool, the 8-ball from a pool cue later on in the later levels. But it gives you, from a gameplay point of view as a player, something to look forward to and unlock and have surprises in. Since the Leapster Arcade turned out, was fairly successful, we of course leaned into the licensing world. So I also developed a couple of arcade games working with Nickelodeon and Warner Brothers. We did a Dora the Explorer arcade game. And this is one of these kind of crash courses of how we learn how to do things, right? Us and the team, we were able to record with the voice cast of Dora, but it's such a condensed time. The amount of time we have in the studio is a 2-hour window. And I'll have to say, those kids who are the voice actors, they're pros, right? Once they're in the studios, they know whoever coached them and got them going, really they knew how to deliver the lines, and just professional, gear and gave us all the material we wanted. Of course, we then found out that they were on to the fourth Boots actor, just because the boys who would play Boots would grow older and their voice would change, so they had to replace them again. So, and on the Scooby-Doo side, we did one which might be reminiscent of Tapper or Root Beer Tapper, and instead of serving drinks to them, you would serve them the right answer to the math problem that was being asked. And otherwise, if you got it wrong, the monsters would come down and grab you, But again, it's like we wanted that simple pick up and play, easy to kind of understand, but difficult to master, that type of logic. And then after those, I started working directly with Pixar and the folks at Disney, and we did the more expanded games. So one of the games I'm happiest with was WALL-E. I got to work with my friend Sam Hood and Jamil Din and the team at LeapFrog, also with some crews externally. Actually, the animation studio was a group called Fake, which is actually based here in Portland. And the programmers were all based out just outside of Boston, an outfit called 360 Kid. And as a team, they were able to do both. We started off on the Ratatouille project, but we kept the team together to work on WALL-E, which was a huge win. And these were bigger games. They were called hub and spoke games, so we had multiple mini games in the middle of it, but it also unlocked a bigger reward system. So in this case, there was like a sort of an action shooter game, another sort of pattern making game. But with WALL-E, we also got to do some new curriculums, which included, planetary. We taught the orders of the planets and which sequence they had. We had a recycling game, so you'd learn recycling facts as you unlock things. We had a math equation game, but also taught constellations and actual constellation patterns, and with a little bit of facts about how the constellation came. And if you got a high score, you would unlock a reward, so you'd play an animated sequence from that we had adapted. So one of the key things about the Leapster was that it had a flash, the software, it could run the software Flash, which allowed us to do a lot of great animation work. And these were all the people involved with that side of it. The folks at Disney, there's 5 layers of approval that you have to go through. But we, at LeapFrog, was literally like a mile down the street from where Pixar was. So we would make a build and then just go walk it down to them and drop it off, and they would come. And there was a nice shared exchange. And we worked with Wolf Wine, Wolf Track Audio, who did all our the narrator voice recording, and we got to record with folks like Patton Oswalt and the cast of Ratatouille, and in WALL-E's case, all the files were shipped to us from Skywalker Sound. So the other title was, again, Leapster, was trying to expand their curriculum. So we did things like food identification and sorting, like this is a fruit, this is a vegetable, in kind of like different ways, and just but keeping that core value of it's got to be fun to play. And so as a gamer, as a person who was raised on games, and really knowing, like, again, kids know what broccoli is, so you really want to hit it right if you're developing it that way. And I was just grateful to have the opportunity to sort of take games into a different direction and have a difference in my life for my niece and nephew. So so that's our how we changed our time in video games and into the toy world.
Any questions?
There must be questions. Yes.
So you said you worked on the Leapster, the
Yep.
LeapFrog. There was a racing game on that console. It was like a game where you like had you had like a car and you had to drive down the road.
It was different than the Cars title, because we did a couple Cars games that were based on the movie Cars.
It had nothing to do with movie Cars. It came out actually beforehand. It was like you played as like the 2 frog characters, or the 2.
Oh, okay.
Like I guess the 2 like titular.
Like the little
Right, the
icon
signature
guys?
Leap.
Cool.
I think that might have been part of the year 1
Yeah,
title.
it was like very early on in the console's lifespan. I remember that game from when I was a kid. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me. I can't find anyone
You know, I was amazed at how much there is on the internet. Like, people have done full playthroughs. You might look for a Leapster playthrough on YouTube.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a bunch of, like, some of the Leapster Arcade, the audio was done by the internal audio lead, Kristen Miltner, and she was a great EMD kind of DJ composer, but her music really has this sort of, you know, earworm type of effect. And if you read the comments in the YouTube section, people are like, "Oh, I've been dying to, this music's been stuck in my head for 10 years."
I remember there was like the sound when you unlocked the car, I thought was like really cool.
And the audio department at LeapFrog was like, again, what's the advantage of being at these companies? It's the people, just like, and people care.
And the advantage of LeapFrog is that they had like a little bit more VC money. So if you notice, he was able to get like the real voice actors, hire real musicians and things like that. And at MGA, we were like, what is the most cost-effective way from A to B? And like, we would get sound-alikes. The secret to our guitar games and dance mess, we might have had like Beyonce or Destiny's Child, whoever was popular at the day. We kind of circumvented copyright laws by licensing the karaoke versions of those songs and then transferring them to MIDI. Probably completely like illegal and violating copyright laws in multiple municipalities, but that was the type of stuff we had to do to get our stuff done and still have that marquee value. We could put Destiny's Child on the box, but guess what? It was just little bleeps and bloops of MIDI.
It sounded like Destiny's.
It sounded like Destiny's Child, and we're using a sound-alike of a sound-alike.
That's funny. It's actually really funny that you say that about the audio quality, because I kind of, now that I think about it, I do remember, like, those LeapFrog games, they were, like, fully voiced. Well, not fully voiced, but they had voice acting. They had, like, and I remember I was sitting in grade school. I was sitting in the daycare program, and I was playing my LeapFrog, and the other kids, they all had Game Boys. And they all looked at me weird, like, why is your Game Boy look so weird? It's like, oh, this is a LeapFrog. It's like, oh, you were ripped off or something like that. But it's actually funny when you look at that, because LeapFrog had, like, better technology. They were all running on better technology than even the Game Boys at the time.
They chose a different path that really paid off. Like, using a Flash engine allowed us to have almost animation quality. You know, a lot of Cartoon Network shows were started on Flash and began as Flash developers.
It's just one of the things Steve Jobs took from us. Because like the Flash that they were developing there would have had the potential to be used in like a lot of more low-end things, and you would have been able to get that fidelity. You would have been able to get more full motion videos. Like, you would have been able to like download things from like Newgrounds and things like that. But once that technology became available, Steve Jobs was like F Flash, and then everything kind of like switched to like HTML5. And the horsepower to do that type of stuff wasn't available on chips that you could buy for $2. So that was, you know, one of those unfortunate things that very few people know about.
You know,
my last question, I guess, has to do with, so I came in, and I'm honestly really pleasantly surprised with what I got. But I came in, did any of you guys do any work for the Skylander series?
So basically, like my what I say to that is we were kind of, I'm sure a lot of things were developed at the same time, but we took the idea of storing character data on like on like a device and then uploading it to the computer. We actually like had the patents to it.
NFC,
However,
right?
NFC, yeah, so we had all of that, and I think we patented it, but because the product wasn't this huge success, like the legal department at MGA completely like forgot about it, didn't care, and the owner didn't care. Otherwise, he would have like sued Disney Infinity or Skylanders into the next century if he thought that he had some claim to those fortunes. But because this wasn't a hit, it wasn't in his brain, and all those patents kind of probably lapsed over time. But we were first, and this is like the guy that runs MGA is a little crazy. He's like sued Lucas. He sued McDonald's. And if he thought he could have made a buck off of suing those guys, he would have. He just forgot. He didn't realize that he owned it.
Hey,
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
I really did enjoy the panel, by the way. Cool. So, but I was really pleasantly surprised with what you guys offered.
Any other questions?
Blast from the past.
Yeah, on my kids had the LeapFrog and the Leapster. Was there ever any thought to like combine the two to make the cartridge games on one play on the other? Because they were independent platforms, I
Well, LeapFrog was, the Leapster, they ended up making a Leapster 2, which had actually onboard memory, so we actually preloaded some of even the arcade games into that came, with the box console. However, the progression of Leapster eventually faded away when, I don't know if its biggest competitor was
VTech.
VTech, and they eventually got bought by VTech. That's how,
Yeah, there's like a horse race between VTech and Leapster,
Yeah.
and VTech, I guess, was able to win the race and buy them out, probably because VTech still was a toy company or a consumer electronics company, and that was their mentality. So they amortized their product line from like clock radios and phones to that, where Leapster was only dependent on the line of products that Leapster could
Right.
sell. And eventually, like the Flash thing, all of those things were very expensive to develop, and you had like Pixar animation, none of that stuff's cheap. VTech was still in that MGA category, where they were doing like, how can we spend the least amount of money and maximize our potential? And I think that plan obviously played out a little bit better on the VTech side.
and I saw a question.
So when I had a Leapster when I was young, I had a game based on the Sonic TV show at the time.
Oh,
Was that
okay.
during your tenure there?
Sonic X.
Yeah.
I believe, didn't work directly on it, but I used to work in a department of about 20 producers, and we were working on multiple titles, a lot of us, most of the time, so we tried to play each other's games as they were kind of passing through. Again, that feedback loop of, oh, I have never touched this, how does it feel as a first-time player? But I do remember the Sonic title, I wasn't part of that, unfortunately.
That's all right. I was wondering if working with Sega versus working with Disney.
Well, what's interesting, and this is like, because I came from the game industry, there was a side of me that was like, this Leapster thing is cool, but why aren't we making it for like Nintendo, or why don't we work with Sony for the PlayStation? And at the time, a lot of the higher ups at LeapFrog said that these video game companies such as Sony or Nintendo didn't want us or our type of software on their platform. And I was like, oh, that can't be true. So I called the people I personally know and just said, hey, do you guys want to come meet with some folks from LeapFrog and we'll show off what we're doing? And sure enough, we spent a lot of time actually traveling to Seattle to see Nintendo or see Microsoft. We met with Nintendo the year the Wii came out, and we had LeapFrog had just hired a marketing person from Sega, and Nintendo was like, well, wait, aren't you guys the competition? But the woman from, the marketing woman from Sega was like, yeah, and who would ever thought that Sonic the Hedgehog would be on a Nintendo device? But it was the first year that Sonic was playing on the DS, so it suddenly opened the door, and they were like, well, what about Mario spelling or Zelda math or something? And what turned out to be is that, and this is the part that I had to kind of grasp, LeapFrog had an aisle in Toys R Us. There's a Barbie aisle, there's a Hot Wheels aisle, but we had the green aisle, it was called, and it was all full of because LeapFrog made a line of toys well beyond the video game side, and they felt that they didn't want to cannibalize the sales of what was available in this aisle, so they kind of turned down the opportunity to go further with Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony. But it certainly wasn't because those companies were not interested. They all saw the value of, hey, wait, gaming can be more than just a high score. You could learn to do your multiplication tables and earn a high score.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies MGA could see both sides, so we would make our bratz TV games, and then we would license the rights out to, say, THQ, and they would make their own bratz games. So that way, Isaac did have the vision to double dip, but the retail buyers are also very competitive. When you had a Toys R Us, you did have a video game section, then you had a TV game section, you had a board game section, but those buyers at those stores were competitive.
Right.
So from our standpoint, we would try to sell the TV game and board game buyer as many things that were like analogs to video games, so that they felt that they had something special that was cashing in on the video game trend, that they would be able to outsell their video game buyer a few cubes down. So you always had all these weird politics up until now. Now almost none of those retailers exist, so it's a little bit more of a free-for-all. I don't know what you could take, like whether that's better or worse, but it was fun to be able to try to make little analogs to what we were doing in the real video game world. But unfortunately, the death of Toys R Us kind of like killed a little, and mobile phones killed a lot of that business.
So was there any times where you felt like, oh, this might be too close to a traditional video game, that maybe they'll see us as competition?
Oh, that's what we did want to see that as competition. Like we wanted to have that like underdog status, and that buyer wanted a crowd. That's why you got all those like hyper zones. I don't know if you remember hyperscan. Like all these ridiculous faux video game items, because that person needed to control their 30 feet of the Toys R Us. So we would just feed them all kinds of like nonsense at times, just so they felt that they had something special. That's how you got the games.com from Tiger, because that was their buyer, and they couldn't buy video games. The video game buyer was down there. So that was like an easy mark to be able to go sell all of these like video game analog devices.
Over here.
Say, as a former Toys R Us employee, I was actually pleasantly surprised to see LeapFrog was actually selling well, even in comparison to being right next to the video game section. It was doing well.
Yeah,
Seeking a balance between the education and gaming.
Yeah, and I always wondered how many, children we could have reached in the educational software side if they could play it on Game Boy, or if they could play it on their PlayStation. And I didn't, as a game maker, I just want people to play this stuff, right? Like, I like the Leapster, but I also knew that a lot of people can only, afford one game console in a house, right? Like, and so if you don't have that one at home, then, and at the same time, I get those parents who just wanted to be sure that whatever they were playing, because they knew it was on a Leapster, they knew that it was educational. So I get both sides of it, but I felt like you can only do so much. Again, you can charge up the hill, and that was my.
And sometimes, like, you have to be willing to lose a little to gain a lot more. I mean, and that's why the Bratz were on PS2. That's why there was a PS2 game and our game, because Isaac wanted the double dip. He wanted both of those streams of income. Perhaps on the Leapster side, they felt that they would be giving up too much to cross that line.
Well, right. I think they were afraid of competing against
Right.
themselves, right? Cannibalizing their own.
But sometimes
sales.
you got to do that to see the bigger vision out there.
So when you guys talked about, like you had technology that you had like the idea to make games educational, and you wanted to bring that to Nintendo, or you wanted to bring that to Sega with their characters. My question, I guess, following up that, is that does that also include the flash technology, the video?
It would have been based on actually their console. So while the Leapster, I mean, one of the things I admire about the Leapster is that they had this forward-thinking, sense to take flash. And I mean, you ought to understand that the Leapster is a 160 by 160 pixel screen, right? There's not a whole lot of room, and yet because of flash and the way flash works, the animation looks fantastic on it. And something to truly admire, and it was accessible at that time as an accessible toy. However, the graphic capabilities of a PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 2 at the time, is quite different. And I always, thought that we could run the whole entire range. We didn't have to. I didn't see why we would have to give up the Leapster in addition to publishing those titles for the other consoles. But
Yeah, so you would adapt to like this PS2 game, you'd use the PS2.
right, we would make 3D rendered worlds and not necessarily use Flash, or have it parallel in its own, taking advantage of what the hardware could do.
Gentlemen back. Yep.
Assuming the flash animations are vectorized, could that technically mean that you could basically watch it in any resolution you want?
Yeah, in fact, we, as on the maker side, we would keep internal reels, what would be at full resolution, just because we liked the work. I mean, we admired the work. Again, the animation company on the two Disney Pixar games is a company here from Portland called Fake, F-F-A-K-E, and they did a fantastic job under the direction of Sam Hood, who was the art director and co-designer of Wall-E and Ratatouille with Jamil Den, and it was just working with folks like that who really know their stuff, was able to take advantage. And sure, on the end product, the Leapster was always a 160 by 160 screen.
And all that stuff I think could have scaled. I mean, I think that there was going to be a lot of potential in Flash. Unfortunately, Apple's beef with Adobe and Flash kind of just sunsetted like other people investing into it, because you could have had like lower cost Game Boys with higher fidelity that could have had downloadable content and things like that. However, there just wasn't any juice behind it because Flash was being unfortunately sunsetted.
I never understood that, right? Like I never got it.
It's just beef.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that was unfortunate because the cheap chips would have allowed you to play a lot more things that you could have been playing on your computer. They probably would have had to adjust the screen resolution, but you still would have had a lot more varied experiences than having to actually program each chip individually with individual graphics and things like that. So it's just one of those things.
Yep.
I think we may have to wrap up.
Yeah, it looks like we have.
It looks like the wrap-up guy's coming for us.
We're reading the hand signals.
They're coming for us.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you guys coming.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and here are a few more videos for you to check out.